Willow Creek Bistro had once been the shining star of Ryan Mitchell's restaurant empire, a rustic yet modern eatery nestled on a bustling downtown corner where cozy lighting met impeccable service and flavors that drew five-star reviews from critics and customers alike. It was the kind of place where proposals happened over candlelit risotto and anniversaries were toasted with craft cocktails. For Ryan, it wasn't just another location in his growing portfolio, it was his passion project, the restaurant that had launched his career and solidified his reputation in the industry. But now, as he sat in his top-floor office overlooking the city skyline, something felt wrong. The latest performance report sat open on his desk, and the numbers didn't lie. Profits were slipping. The once stellar customer satisfaction ratings had dipped, and social media was abuzz with complaints. Something was broken at Willow Creek, and Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it ran deeper than just a few bad shifts. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he reread the staff reports and customer feedback for the third time that morning. Words like rushed service, cold food, and unwelcoming staff jumped off the page. More concerning were the whispers he'd heard, unofficial murmurs from long-time employees who no longer smiled when they spoke of Willow Creek. Rumors of favoritism, harsh schedules, and a manager who ruled through fear rather than inspiration had made their way to Ryan's ears. At the center of it all was Derek Simmons, a charismatic but tightly wound figure who Ryan had promoted to general manager just over a year ago. On paper, Derek had seemed perfect. Numbers, focused, driven, and experienced. But numbers didn't tell the whole story, and Ryan knew that better than anyone, delegation had been one of Ryan's strengths. As his restaurant group expanded, he had placed his trust in a carefully selected team to oversee daily operations while he focused on broader strategy. But now, as he stared at the declining numbers and unsettling reports, he couldn't help but question whether he had become too detached. Was he so focused on growth that he had ignored the rot spreading at the core of his very first success? Ryan's instincts told him something was seriously wrong, and for a man who had built his career on getting the details right from the garnish on a cocktail to the pacing of a 7-course meal, those instincts were screaming for action. That afternoon, Ryan called his assistant Lauren into the office. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Postpone the meetings. Delegate what you can. I need to be somewhere." Lauren raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sensing the gravity in her boss's tone, Ryan reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a printed job listing for a dishwasher position at Willow Creek, an opening that had been posted the week before. "I'm going in undercover," he said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "No one can know, not the staff, not Derek. I need to see it from the ground level, just like I did when I first opened the place." Lauren hesitated only a moment before nodding. She knew Ryan well enough to trust his gut. "I'll handle everything," she said softly, and with that, the plan was set. Over the next 48 hours, Ryan transformed. The tailored suits and designer watches were swapped for thrift store jeans, a plain grey hoodie, and an old baseball cap. He even grew out his beard slightly, trading his clean-cut CEO look for the tired, worn-in appearance of someone just looking for work. He practiced a new voice, lower, quieter, and came up with a fake backstory recently laid off, looking for anything to pay the bills. On a chilly Wednesday morning, he stood outside Willow Creek, staring at the brick-lined facade that once symbolized everything he loved about hospitality. The exterior looked the same, warm lights, ivy curling up the walls, a chalkboard sign boasting the soup of the day, but Ryan's gut told him that the heart of the place had changed. He pushed open the front door and was greeted by a strained smile from the hostess who didn't recognize him. Her welcome to Willow Creek lacked the usual sparkle, her eyes slightly hollow from fatigue. Ryan introduced himself simply as Chris and said he was there about the dishwasher position. The hostess disappeared into the back, and minutes later, Derek appeared, tall, broad, and all business. He barely glanced at Ryan before barking out a few questions about availability and experience. There was no warmth in his tone, no interest in who Ryan was beyond his utility. "You can start today," Derek muttered. "We're short-staffed. Follow me." As Ryan was led through the kitchen he once proudly designed, he saw tired eyes, frantic hands, and a silence that didn't belong in a healthy team. The camaraderie was gone, replaced by mechanical motions and sidelong glances of caution. It was everything he had feared and more. By the end of that first shift, Ryan's hands were pruny from scrubbing pots, and his back ached from standing hunched over for hours. But as he clocked out and stepped into the cool evening air, a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity settled over him. He had begun to see the truth of what had become of Willow Creek. The cracks weren't in the foundation, they were in the culture, the leadership, the very spirit of what had made the restaurant special. Ryan wasn't just investigating a struggling business, he was walking back into a dream that someone else had turned into a nightmare. And now there was no turning back. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at the changing season, but Ryan Mitchell barely noticed as he walked up to the rear employee entrance of Willow Creek Bistro. His posture was slouched slightly, his hoodie zipped halfway up to guard against the chill. In place of designer shoes were worn-out sneakers, and his jeans had been intentionally scuffed to complete the image of a man down on his luck. A borrowed name tag, reading Chris M., rested in his jacket pocket along with a folded copy of the dishwasher job listing he'd printed at home. His heart beat faster than he liked to admit. He'd given dozens of keynote speeches and navigated multi-million-dollar deals with ease. But today, stepping back into the kitchen of his first restaurant as a stranger, he felt nervous. This wasn't about power, prestige, or branding. This was about reconnection, getting to the truth, without filters, without titles, and without anyone knowing who he really was. Inside the kitchen, the rhythm was anything but harmonious. Ryan had built Willow Creek on the principles of excellence and camaraderie, where chefs and servers moved in tandem like a well-rehearsed ballet. But what he saw now was closer to an assembly line than a living, breathing team. The clatter of pans echoed against the stainless steel walls, and the sharp scent of industrial cleaner mixed with the aroma of roasted garlic and thyme staff moved briskly, but mechanically, eyes-low conversations clipped. There were no jokes over the prep table, no casual chatter between the line cooks. Even the background music, once a carefully curated playlist of jazz and indie acoustic, had been replaced by silence, broken only by terse instructions shouted across the room. Ryan stepped inside and waited near the dry storage shelves, uncertain of who would greet him, if anyone. A few minutes later, Derek Simmons appeared from the far end of the kitchen, clipboard in hand, and irritation already creasing his forehead. He was taller than Ryan remembered. Maybe it was the boots, or maybe it was the way he carried himself now, inflated by unchecked authority. Derek gave Ryan a cursory once-over. "You're the one here for dishwashing?" he asked, his voice flat and already, halfway to disinterested. Ryan nodded and offered a quiet, "Yes, sir. Chris, I'm ready to work." Derek didn't bother with small talk. "We're short-staffed and behind as it is. You start now. Aprons are over there. Don't fall behind and don't ask stupid questions." He didn't wait for a response before turning on his heel and walking away, barking an order at a server who'd hesitated for a second too long at the plating station. Ryan took a breath, grabbed an apron, and made his way to the dishwashing station in the corner. It was everything he remembered and nothing like he'd hoped. The pile of dirty plates was already sky-high. Bits of sauce hardened into streaks, and stacks of pots sat in lukewarm grey water. As he pulled on gloves and turned on the sprayer, he caught snippets of conversation in hushed tones. Two line cooks whispered about someone quitting mid-shift last night. A server muttered about not getting her breaks. No one noticed him, and that was exactly what he wanted. In this corner of the kitchen, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a pair of hands doing a thankless job, scrubbing, rinsing, stacking, and listening. What struck Ryan most in those early hours wasn't just the pace of the kitchen, but the emotional temperature. It was cold, not in degrees, but in energy. He remembered the opening week of Willow Creek when staff stayed late just to share a drink and celebrate a great service. Now the only thing people seemed to share was exhaustion. Eye contact was rare and smiles even rarer. Derek's presence loomed like a storm cloud, and his tone was either condescending or dismissive, depending on the moment. When the head server missed a garnish on an order, Derek shouted loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear. When a prep cook dropped a container of chopped herbs, Derek made a scene instead of lending a hand. Leadership through fear, Ryan thought grimly. It was the opposite of everything they'd built the restaurant on. As the lunch rush hit, Ryan felt the pressure ramp up. Orders piled onto the printer in bursts, and the rhythm of the kitchen became frantic, but the coordination was missing. Everyone moved fast, but not together. Derek didn't step in to help. He hovered like a hawk, criticizing and correcting, never encouraging. The sous chef was clearly overworked, her shoulders tight as she tried to do the work of 3 people. Ryan kept his head down, working through the endless stream of dishes, observing every detail. The way people avoided Derek's gaze, the way they flinched when he approached, the quiet way they checked their schedules with dread. This wasn't a team. It was a group of individuals trying not to get noticed, trying to survive their shift. By the time the final lunch order was plated and sent out, Ryan's arms were sore and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. But his exhaustion wasn't physical. It was emotional. He had hoped the rumors were exaggerated, that maybe the team was just going through a rough patch. But now, just a few hours into his undercover shift, he realized the situation was worse than he imagined. Derek had cultivated an atmosphere of fear and compliance, stripping away the soul of the place. And no one, not a single person, looked like they believed things would change. Ryan leaned against the counter during a brief lull, glancing toward the staff entrance where a delivery was coming in. He didn't know what he'd find in the days ahead, but one thing was already clear. Something had gone deeply wrong at Willow Creek, and he was here to set it right. By the end of his second full day at Willow Creek Bistro, Ryan Mitchell had begun to settle into his role not as the CEO who once hand-picked the tile for the kitchen walls, but as the invisible dishwasher working silently at the back of the house. He moved through the dish pit with mechanical precision, his hands raw from hot water and degreaser, his back sore from bending over piles of pans and plates, but his mind was anything but passive. Every clang of a dropped tray, every murmured complaint, every sidelong glance carried a weight he catalogued meticulously. From his vantage point, halfway hidden behind a steel rack of drying utensils, Ryan was witnessing a slow, silent collapse of everything Willow Creek had once stood for, and the more he listened, the clearer the cracks became. It started with whispered conversations. During lulls between rushes, servers would huddle near the drink station, their voices low and cautious. "I still haven't seen my overtime from last month," one of them muttered, double-checking the posted schedule. "He's got me working 6 days again, and it's not even legal." Another chimed in, rolling her eyes. "You're lucky I'm down to 2 shifts, and he brought in his cousin again for the weekend brunch. We're disposable to him." Ryan dried his hands slowly, pretending to focus on a pan while his ears picked up every word. These weren't isolated frustrations. They were patterns, consistent, troubling patterns, pointing to a manager who manipulated schedules, delayed pay, and played favorites without shame. What struck Ryan most was not just what was being said, but how it was said. The staff spoke in hushed tones, with eyes constantly darting toward the kitchen door or the office hallway. There was no trust, no safe space to vent. Even the more seasoned employees, people Ryan remembered by face, if not by name, walked on eggshells. Carol, the sous chef, had once been the loudest laugh in the room. Now she barely spoke. Jordan, the teenage line cook, who had once dreamed of culinary school, moved like he was just waiting to be yelled at again. The silence between staff wasn't from focus, it was from fear, and fear, Ryan knew, was poison in any workplace. It dulled ambition, it buried creativity, it turned people into shadows of themselves. Derek's presence, meanwhile, was like a storm cloud that hovered constantly. He rarely praised. More often he scolded loudly and with biting sarcasm. He managed through intimidation, not mentorship. Ryan watched as Derek dismissed concerns about broken equipment, cut corners on food prep to save costs, and mocked a new server for not knowing the difference between two types of wine. At one point, when the head server politely asked for a shift change due to a family emergency, Derek responded with a sigh and a snide remark about everyone wanting special treatment. Ryan had to bite his tongue to keep from reacting. It wasn't just unprofessional. It was cruel. And no one dared call him out. Not because they agreed, but because they knew what would happen if they did. During each break, Ryan retreated to the small, dusty corner of the back room that served as a staff locker area. While others scrolled through their phones or silently ate cold leftovers, Ryan took notes on napkins, scrap paper, even the back of a supply order sheet. He tracked who was getting which shifts, who seemed favored, who looked exhausted. He noted the recurring names in complaints, the visible bruises of burnout etched into the tired eyes of his co-workers. At night, he returned home and documented everything in a locked file on his laptop, building a quiet but damning record of the dysfunction simmering beneath the surface of his beloved restaurant. And still, he kept scrubbing. Plate after plate, pan after pan, he worked in silence, listening, watching, absorbing every detail mattered. The late deliveries, the understocked prep station, the growing pile of complaints written in dry erase marker on the break room wall only to be wiped clean each night, never addressed. Ryan realized that the problem wasn't just Derek, it was the environment he had created. One where no one believed they had the power to change anything. One where survival had replaced pride. And it broke Ryan's heart in ways he hadn't expected. But with every aching step and every overheard whisper, Ryan's resolve grew. He wasn't just collecting stories, he was preparing for a reckoning. The soul of Willow Creek had been buried beneath layers of fear, fatigue, and indifference, but he still believed it could be saved. The staff deserved better. The customers deserved better. And most of all, the people who had poured their hearts into this place, who still showed up, even beaten down, deserved someone to fight for them. Ryan intended to be that someone, even if for now he had to keep his head down, hands soaked and identity hidden. The tension in the kitchen that day was thick enough to slice with a carving knife. Ryan had arrived early for his shift, hoping to beat the chaos and perhaps catch a few quiet moments of observation. But the moment he stepped through the service entrance, he knew something was off. The usually busy prep crew was working in near silence, heads down, shoulders hunched. Pans clattered louder than usual, not because of volume, but because no one was speaking to dampen the sound. The fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the stainless steel counters, and the air was filled with the scent of overripe produce and burnt toast. The atmosphere was taut like a rubber band stretched to its limit. As Ryan tied on his apron and made his way toward the dish pit, the kitchen erupted in sudden shouting. Derek's voice came booming across the line, sharp and cutting like broken glass. "Are you kidding me, Jordan? What the hell is this?" Ryan looked up just in time to see Derek holding up a slightly overcooked chicken breast, waving it above his head, like a prosecutor presenting evidence in court. Jordan, the young line cook who couldn't have been older than 19, stood frozen in place, his face flushed red and hands trembling. "Do you have any idea how much that costs? We're already behind, and now you're just wasting product. Are you trying to tank this restaurant?" Derek roared. Jordan tried to stammer out an apology, but Derek cut him off, his voice rising even further. "You screw up again, and you're done. Get it right, or get out." The entire kitchen went silent. Servers stood motionless near the expo window. The sous chef paused mid-slice, and even the rhythmic clink of plates at Ryan's station came to a halt. No one dared intervene. Derek wasn't just having a bad day, this was who he had become. Ryan's jaw tightened as he watched Jordan retreat into himself, eyes lowered, lips pressed tightly together. No coach or mentor would ever humiliate a team member like that. Not in front of a full kitchen, not over something so minor. It wasn't about the chicken. It was about dominance. Derek needed to remind everyone who held the power in this place, and in doing so he drove yet another wedge between himself and the people he was supposed to lead. Later that afternoon, Ryan took a closer look around the kitchen during a lull in orders, and what he saw made his stomach turn. The prep fridge had several containers labeled with expired dates, one of them holding wilted herbs and slimy vegetables. Raw meat sat in uncovered bins next to cooked items. The sink used for rinsing produce was clogged with food waste, and the dry storage was a mess of open flour bags, cracked spice containers, and sticky shelves. Hygiene protocols, the kind Ryan had insisted on from day one, had all but vanished. He watched one cook wipe his hands on a visibly stained towel and go right back to chopping vegetables. It was clear that cleanliness, safety, and order had been replaced with speed, desperation, and fatigue. As the day wore on, more cracks began to show. Ryan overheard a server venting near the break room, clearly on the verge of tears. "He cut my hours again this week. I asked why, and he said, 'We're over budget,' then gave 2 extra shifts to Kyle. Of course, Kyle's his buddy." Another cook chimed in quietly, "I'm still waiting on my overtime from last month. HR says it's being processed, but it's been weeks." Meanwhile, Derek's off taking phone calls in his office with the door shut. Ryan kept his expression neutral as he rinsed a stack of plates, but inside he was seething. The favoritism, the disorganization, the lack of oversight. It all stemmed from Derek. And worse, no one seemed to believe there was a way out. They were just surviving one shift at a time. What haunted Ryan most was how normalized it had all become. Staff didn't complain loudly anymore. They whispered, they shrugged, they carried on. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they no longer expected anyone to listen. The dream of Willow Creek had become a cautionary tale. Where it had once been a sanctuary for creativity and growth, it was now a place of dread. Ryan watched Carol, the once bold sous chef, avoid eye contact as she passed Derek. He noticed the way Jordan flinched at loud noises now, and how Emily, one of the best servers in the restaurant, kept her eyes on the floor when handing in orders. The culture of excellence he'd worked so hard to build had been quietly dismantled by fear, resentment, and unchecked authority. And yet, Ryan kept washing dishes. He kept listening. He kept writing notes when no one was looking, because despite the exhaustion and the heartbreak, he hadn't given up. Not yet. He knew that behind every burnt-out employee was a person who still remembered why they chose this job in the first place. He believed that buried beneath the dysfunction was still the soul of Willow Creek, a soul worth saving. But to do that, he'd need more than frustration. He'd need proof. He'd need allies. And above all, he'd need the courage to confront what Derek had become and dismantle it from the inside out. It was nearing the end of another long, grueling shift when Ryan decided to take out the trash, an excuse that would put him near the back alley where deliveries and late-night conversations happened away from the eyes of the dining room. The kitchen was still humming, though at a slower pace than during the midday rush. Plates were trickling in for final cleaning, and most of the staff were busy resetting for the evening. Ryan had learned that the back alley behind Willow Creek held more than just dumpsters. It was a place where whispers carried, where tension lingered, and where he'd already overheard more than one staff member complain under their breath about management. But tonight, something different caught his attention. As he pushed open the heavy back door, he heard voices, not just casual chatting or venting. This was low, sharp, deliberate conversation just around the corner from the loading dock. Ryan paused by the doorway, his heart rate quickening. He stepped quietly into the shadows, positioning himself near a stack of old crates partially hidden behind a recycling bin. He recognized Derek's voice immediately, brisk, impatient, and slightly hushed. The other man unfamiliar had a rougher tone and wore a navy work jacket with a delivery company logo. They stood near a white box truck with its back doors ajar. "Make sure it's labeled correctly this time," Derek was saying. "Last week I had to cover for a duplicate invoice." The delivery man nodded, flipping through a clipboard. "You got it. Same arrangement, just different paperwork. Nothing unusual on the books." "Yeah." Derek glanced around, lowering his voice even more. "Exactly. No red flags. Keep it quiet. I don't want anyone asking questions, especially corporate." From his spot in the dark, Ryan froze. His instincts, honed over years of running businesses, were now screaming. This wasn't a normal supply drop. This wasn't even a casual backdoor deal. This was something else, something calculated and secretive. The vague language about invoices and arrangements sent alarms ringing in his head. Why would Derek be receiving inventory in secrecy, and why the emphasis on different paperwork and keeping things off the radar? Ryan stayed perfectly still as the two men wrapped up the conversation and exchanged a brief handshake. The delivery driver climbed back into his truck and drove off without entering the building. Derek didn't go back inside right away. He lingered for a moment, checked his phone, and then disappeared into the office, locking the door behind him. Ryan stood there for a long moment after the alley fell silent again. He stepped forward, cautiously, glancing at the tire tracks left behind by the delivery truck and the faint scent of garlic and truffle oil hanging in the air. Something about it didn't add up. He hadn't seen any of those ingredients logged in the kitchen inventory recently, and he knew from earlier conversations that certain premium supplies had been mysteriously unavailable for days. The staff had been told they were on back order or delayed in shipment, but Ryan had already begun to doubt that story. Now it seemed more likely that those missing ingredients weren't missing at all. They were being redirected perhaps to another location or sold off under the table. It wasn't just mismanagement anymore, it was something darker. Potential fraud, theft, exploitation. Back in the dish pit, Ryan's mind raced as he returned to scrubbing pans and stacking clean plates. Every word of that alley conversation played back in his memory. He had no video, no recording, just what he'd seen and heard. And while it wasn't enough to go public with, it was enough to confirm a growing suspicion. Derek wasn't just bad at his job, he was corrupt. He was using his authority to cover up something unethical, maybe even illegal, and he was counting on the staff's silence and fear to keep it hidden. Ryan realized that if he hadn't been undercover, he never would have learned any of this. No report, no manager meeting, no anonymous feedback system would have exposed it. Derek knew how to bury things, but Ryan was learning how to dig. Later that night, long after the last dish was put away and the last server clocked out, Ryan lingered in the walk-in cooler, pretending to reorganize the dairy shelf. He took quiet stock of what was there, and more importantly, what wasn't. The gaps were noticeable now. No imported cheese, no truffle paste. Several containers marked weekly delivery were either half full or entirely missing. Ryan began snapping mental pictures and even managed to discreetly jot down the inventory discrepancies into a folded piece of order paper. If Derek was diverting supplies somewhere, the evidence would be in the numbers in the paperwork, and in the absence of goods, the pieces were beginning to fit together, but he needed more. More proof, more witnesses, more certainty before he made his move. As he walked home under the glow of streetlights, Ryan's thoughts were heavy. He thought of the employees, the ones being blamed for the restaurant's struggles, the ones scraping by on slashed hours and missed overtime. They were suffering because of Derek's greed, and they didn't even know the full truth yet. He thought of Jordan trembling earlier that day under Derek's fury, and of Carol quietly holding the kitchen together while being shut out of decisions they deserved better. And so did Willow Creek. It wasn't just a business at stake anymore, it was the soul of a place that once meant something, and Ryan wasn't going to let someone like Derek erase that. Not now, not ever. The air in the kitchen the following morning carried a heaviness that Ryan had come to recognize. It was the weight of caution, the silence of people who had learned to keep their heads down and their voices lower. Yet despite the unspoken tension, a subtle shift was beginning to unfold. It wasn't grand or dramatic, no bold confrontation or whistle-blowing moment, but rather the kind of shift that happens in quiet, tentative exchanges. And it started with Carol. The head chef had always moved with quiet confidence, but lately Ryan had noticed something else behind her sharp eyes, a kind of restrained fatigue, the weariness of someone trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. As Ryan handed her a freshly scrubbed baking sheet during a lull in service, he finally broke the ice. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" he asked casually. She glanced at him, then nodded. "Too long. Maybe there was a pause. You're new. You'll figure it out." That was the invitation he needed. Over the next few days, Ryan made a point to assist Carol during prep. Nothing too obvious, just a quiet helping hand when the line got backed up, or she needed someone to run down a missing ingredient. She never asked questions about his background, and he never offered anything beyond his cover. But slowly, something shifted between them. One evening, while chopping onions side by side, Carol spoke without looking up. "Just so you know, people don't last long around here if they ask too many questions." Ryan said nothing, sensing the door opening. "Derek doesn't like being challenged." She continued, "You disagree with him. Your shifts get cut. Speak up to corporate. You're off the schedule by next week." Ryan nodded silently, letting her words settle like dust. Carol didn't say much more that night, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. Be careful. Derek played dirty, and anyone who stood in his way usually disappeared quietly. Jordan was a different story, softer, younger, still carrying the nervous energy of someone not yet jaded by years in the industry. Ryan had noticed the teenager working double time in the kitchen, always flinching a bit when Derek walked by, always triple-checking his work like his job depended on it. During a slow afternoon, Ryan saw an opening. Jordan was on break, sitting alone near the lockers, sipping a soda and scrolling through his phone. Ryan sat down a few feet away, feigning exhaustion. "You're one of the hardest workers here," he said casually. Jordan looked up, startled, unsure how to respond. "Thanks," he muttered, then added, "Just trying to keep my head down." Ryan waited a moment, then said, "You ever wonder why everything here feels so off?" Jordan's eyes darted toward the hallway where Derek's office sat. "The door always closed all the time," he whispered. "But no one does anything. Everyone's scared." As the days passed, the connection between them grew stronger. Jordan didn't spill everything at once. He was too cautious for that, but little by little he began to share what he'd seen. He mentioned how orders would come in and disappear, how one week the kitchen was overstocked with ingredients they never used, and the next they were short on basics, like flour and eggs. He'd overheard Derek on phone calls, talking about adjustments and alternative arrangements. Jordan didn't fully understand what he was hearing, but Ryan did. And now he had someone inside who noticed the same red flags. Their alliance was unspoken, built on mutual respect and careful timing. Ryan didn't push. He just listened, and Jordan in turn began to trust him. But it was Emily, one of the senior servers, who gave Ryan the most insight into the front-of-house issues and another piece of the puzzle. Emily was sharp, quick on her feet, and well-liked by both the customers and her fellow staff. But behind her bright smile and polished service, Ryan could see the exhaustion. Late one night after the dinner crowd had thinned, and the music in the dining room had softened to a whisper, Ryan caught her restocking glasses at the bar. "How long you been here?" he asked. Emily laughed under her breath. "Too long," she said, echoing Carol's earlier words. Ryan leaned on the counter. "You ever notice the inventory seems off?" Her hands froze for a second before she continued wiping a glass. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Things go missing. Supplies come in, but the numbers don't make sense. Derek says it's just errors in logging." But she trailed off, lowering her voice even further. "It's not just mistakes. It's something else. Something bigger." By the end of that week, Ryan had quietly built a network of 3 unlikely allies: Carol, the seasoned chef, who saw everything but kept her mouth shut for the sake of the staff; Jordan, the young cook, trying to survive long enough to help his family; and Emily, the perceptive server, who had learned to smile while watching the foundation crack beneath her feet. They didn't know who Ryan really was, but they sensed something different about him, something trustworthy. And he, in turn, saw in them the heart of Willow Creek people who still cared even when they had every reason to give up. The pieces were coming together, but the story was far from over. Derek's grip on the restaurant was still strong, and if Ryan was going to challenge it, he'd need more than just allies. He'd need a plan. And soon, the tension at Willow Creek had grown heavier by the day. But Ryan knew that waiting any longer wouldn't yield answers. He had to take action. So one evening, when Derek stepped out of the kitchen for his usual post-dinner smoke break, Ryan made his move. He'd noticed that Derek often left his office unlocked during these brief escapes, confident no one would dare cross that line. But Ryan wasn't just another employee. Moving quickly but quietly, he slipped into the cramped, cluttered office, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The air inside was stale, and the overhead light flickered with an unsettling buzz. Papers were stacked in unorganized piles, payroll forms, inventory logs, handwritten notes, and a laptop sat open on the desk. The screen dim but not locked. It didn't take long before Ryan found what he was looking for. He rifled carefully through the most recent invoices, comparing them to what he'd seen in the kitchen and storerooms. There were immediate inconsistencies. A case of imported olive oil, supposedly delivered last week, nowhere to be found. 5 pounds of truffle salt listed on paper, but never used in any dish since Ryan had been undercover. The amounts billed didn't match the supplies received, and several invoices had vague item descriptions like special order or premium supplement with no supplier contact info listed. More alarming were entire folders labeled alt records on the computer desktop. Ryan clicked into one and found spreadsheets that didn't match the restaurant's standard formatting. These were side documents clearly not part of the official record-keeping system. Payments were logged to a secondary location he didn't recognize, and delivery dates often aligned with days where staff had complained of missing ingredients. Before he could investigate further, the muffled sound of Derek's voice echoed through the hallway. Ryan froze, heart pounding. Through the thin office wall, he could just make out Derek speaking on his phone, his tone low but urgent. Not. The regular invoice. Use the alternate template. Like last time, Derek said, I don't want this showing up on the books. Ryan leaned closer to the door, barely breathing. Yes. Same arrangement. Thursday drop. Same time. Half of it comes through here. The rest goes to Elm Bistro. There was a long pause. I don't care what it costs. Just keep it quiet. I'm not having this traced back. Ryan backed away from the door, the words swirling in his mind. Elm Bistro. That name was unfamiliar, but the implication was unmistakable. Derek wasn't just cooking the books. He was funneling supplies to another restaurant and using Willow Creek to fund it. Ryan slipped out of the office moments before Derek returned, heart still racing, and forced himself to move calmly back to the dish pit. As he resumed washing pans, he couldn't stop replaying everything he had just heard and read. The scale of the deception was deeper than he'd feared. Derek wasn't just stealing, he was laundering product, rerouting high-end supplies and altering financial records. But he needed more than just overheard conversations and mismatched spreadsheets to take him down. He needed stories. He needed the truth from the people who had endured Derek's leadership firsthand and who now slowly were beginning to trust Ryan enough to share it. Later that evening during cleanup, Carol spoke in a low voice as she organized the spice rack. Derek's been logging me for less hours than I actually work, she said. Payroll never matches what I clock. I used to complain, but it just got worse. Ryan nodded, not pressing but listening intently. A few feet away, Jordan added his own story. He scheduled me for 5 shifts last week, but I only got paid for 3. I brought it up and he said the system glitched. It's always the system's fault. Ryan filed that away, another sign of deliberate underpayment masked by convenient excuses. Even Emily shared her frustration. He changes the schedule the night before shifts. I show up and find out I'm not even working that day. Then he writes me up for no showing on a shift I never agreed to. It's exhausting. The stories kept coming, each one a thread in a web of exploitation that now stretched across every corner of Willow Creek staff who couldn't afford to lose their jobs were being bullied into silence. Hours were shaved, shifts reassigned without notice, and favoritism dictated who got steady income and who was left struggling. But no one had reported anything formally. The fear was too strong. Derek had created a system where speaking up meant losing everything and everyone knew it. Ryan had come in expecting to find a failing operation. What he'd discovered instead was something much more painful. a restaurant slowly being bled dry by the man trusted to lead it while the staff suffered in silence. But Ryan wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. It was during a quiet moment between lunch and dinner service when Emily let the details slip. Ryan was drying wine glasses behind the bar while she prepped for the evening crowd. Her voice was casual, almost offhand, but it stopped Ryan in his tracks. "You know, I think I saw Derek at a place on Elm Street last weekend," she said, frowning slightly. "A few of us went there for drinks after our shift. It's this little upscale bistro tucked between a florist and an art gallery. Thought it was weird. He didn't say hi, just ducked into the back." Ryan's heart skipped Elm Street. That was the same location Derek had mentioned during his secret phone call in the office. Trying not to look too interested, Ryan asked lightly, "What's the place called?" Emily shrugged. "I think it's called Leighton's Fancy Vibe. Small plates, exposed brick walls. You'd never think someone like Derek would be running the place, but he looked right at home." Ryan's instincts flared. He thanked Emily, then spent the rest of the shift going through the motions, all while his mind was spinning. If what she said was true, and Derek was indeed involved with another restaurant, this could be the missing link proof that the stolen supplies weren't just disappearing, but being redirected for personal profit. After his shift ended, Ryan didn't go straight home. Instead, he changed out of his Willow Creek uniform and headed across town, slipping into the early evening crowd with his hoodie pulled low. Elm Street was one of those up-and-coming areas gentrified with just the right amount of charm string lights above the sidewalk boutique shops, a jazz trio playing near the corner cafe. As he turned the corner, he saw it. Leighton's Bistro. From the outside, it looked unassuming, but as Ryan stepped closer, his stomach tightened. The smell was unmistakable. Saffron imported oils, fresh herbs, and the presentation in the window display looked eerily familiar. He took a seat near the bar, ordered a small plate, and began observing everything with quiet intensity. The menu listed items that struck a nerve, dishes he'd once helped design at Willow Creek, but that had been removed due to ingredient shortages. There was a mushroom risotto drizzled with truffle oil, a cheese board featuring imported camembert, and a signature flatbread dusted with the same rosemary salt that had gone missing back in their kitchen. It wasn't just a coincidence. These weren't similar ingredients. They were the same down to the brands Ryan had seen listed on falsified invoices. When a waiter passed by with a tray of fresh deliveries from the kitchen, Ryan took a discreet photo of the plates. Then when the server went to reset the bar counter, Ryan slipped to the back hall pretending to look for the restroom and caught a glimpse into the kitchen. It was all the confirmation he needed. On a shelf near the prep line, he spotted boxes labeled with the Willow Creek supplier codes, ones he knew by heart. There was a crate of imported saffron strands, the exact same brand that had been out of stock for weeks. Behind that, he saw familiar containers of black truffle paste and an unopened bottle of signature Italian balsamic, the very items that had mysteriously vanished from Willow Creek's inventory. He stepped back and quickly snapped several photos, making sure the labels were visible. The staff at Leighton's moved professionally, unaware of the man in the hallway documenting their stockroom. As Ryan turned to leave, he caught one more glimpse through the pass window, and standing just past the sauté station reviewing order tickets with a clipboard in hand was Derek. Not as a guest, not as a passerby, but as a manager. Ryan left the bistro with a camera roll full of evidence and a mind full of fire. The deception was no longer speculative, it was real, blatant, and shameless. Derek had created a side business and was siphoning product from Willow Creek to fund it. Supplies were being rerouted, invoices falsified, and expenses buried deep in alternate spreadsheets. And while his own team at Willow Creek struggled with broken schedules and low morale, Derek had been building a quiet empire across town on their backs. Ryan walked the city blocks back home in silence, a rare moment when even his thoughts couldn't keep pace with the rush of emotions he felt. Anger, betrayal, and something more urgent, determination. He finally had what he needed to move forward, but he had to be smart. The takedown needed to be airtight. That night, back at home, Ryan uploaded the photos, organized the documents, and began compiling a timeline. Every inventory shortage, every altered invoice, every suspicious delivery, every name, every date, every dollar. He wasn't just preparing a confrontation, he was preparing a case, one that would leave no room for denial. One that wouldn't just remove Derek from power, but would reveal the damage he'd done, the trust he'd broken, and the justice that was now on its way. Willow Creek had been his first love in business, and someone had tried to hollow it out from the inside. But Ryan wasn't just here to protect his legacy anymore, he was here to protect his people. The Friday lunch rush had started like any other, tickets pouring in, non-stop servers weaving between tables, the kitchen moving at a frantic pace to keep up with orders. Ryan was at his usual post in the dish pit, sleeves rolled up, eyes scanning the rhythm of the kitchen like a conductor reading a score. But beneath the clatter of pans and the hiss of hot oil, something was off. Tension pulsed in the air, thick and humming, like a storm brewing just beyond the walls. Jordan, the teenage line cook, Ryan had grown quietly protective of, looked particularly anxious that day. He moved quickly but sloppily, his hands shaking as he prepped orders at the grill station. Carol had offered to step in and help, but Derek had refused, saying Jordan needed to learn under pressure. Ryan had a bad feeling in his chest, a tightness that hadn't eased all morning. Then it happened. A steak meant to be medium rare came off the grill with a charred crust, not completely ruined but not perfect. It could have been salvaged, replated, maybe even redone in minutes without issue. But Derek saw it first. He snatched the plate with a dramatic flair, holding it up like a piece of garbage. "What is this?" he shouted, the words slicing through the room. Everyone froze. "Do you even know how to use a grill, Jordan? Or do you just like wasting expensive cuts of meat?" Jordan's face went pale, his hands already trembling. Dropped the tongs he'd been using. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, eyes wide with panic. "I'll remake it." But Derek wasn't interested in solutions. He wanted a spectacle. "You'll remake it? You can't even cook it right the first time. Maybe you're not cut out for this job. Maybe I should replace you with someone who knows what they're doing." Something inside, Ryan snapped. He had watched Derek humiliate people before, had listened to the whispers of fear and exhaustion. But this was different. This wasn't just poor leadership. This was cruelty broadcasted in front of the whole team. He stepped forward, water still dripping from his gloves, voice calm but steady. "That's enough, Derek." The kitchen fell dead silent. Derek turned, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." Ryan pulled off his gloves and stood tall, his voice rising just enough to be heard without yelling. "He made a mistake. You could have handled that professionally, but instead you chose to humiliate him in front of everyone." Derek let out a humorless laugh. "And who are you to tell me how to manage my staff? You're a dishwasher." Ryan met his glare unwavering. "I'm someone who's worked in enough kitchens to know that fear doesn't build better teams, respect does." The staff stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Carol glanced at Ryan, a flicker of something relief, admiration passing behind her eyes. Jordan stood still, stunned, while Emily peeked in from the service window, wide-eyed. Derek's face turned red, not from embarrassment, but rage. "You think you can lecture me in my kitchen?" he hissed. "You don't get to question me. You don't get to talk to me like that. You're done. You're fired. Right now, get out." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't argue. Instead, he calmly untied his apron and folded it on the counter. "If that's your decision," he said softly, "I'll leave." Then, with a final look at Jordan and the others, he added, "But remember this moment, because it's not the end of this story." Ryan walked out the back door, the staff still silent in his wake. He didn't slam the door. He didn't say anything dramatic, but the message was clear. Something had changed. Derek might have thought he'd just rid himself of an insolent dishwasher, but what he didn't know, what no one in that kitchen yet knew, was that he had just fired the owner of the restaurant. Ryan's mind was already racing. The confrontation had come sooner than planned, but it had unfolded exactly the way it needed to. Derek had shown his true colors, not just to Ryan, but to everyone in that kitchen. His cruelty, his arrogance, his misuse of power. They had been laid bare, exposed under the harsh lights of his own domain. Outside, Ryan leaned against the wall, taking a long, steadying breath. The cold air felt different now, sharper but cleaner. He pulled out his phone and opened the folder, where all the evidence sat neatly organized. The photos from Leighton's, the screenshots of fake invoices, the audio notes he'd been recording in secret. It was all there ready. But now it wasn't just about the paperwork. Now it was personal. Derek had crossed a line, not just with Ryan, but with every staff member who had been belittled, cheated, and silenced under his watch. As Ryan walked away from Willow Creek that afternoon, the sun breaking through clouds above the city, he knew exactly what he had to do. The gloves were off, and the real reckoning was about to begin. The morning after his explosive firing, Ryan Mitchell stood before the familiar glass storefront of Willow Creek Bistro, no longer in the hoodie and jeans that had allowed him to blend in, but in the sleek navy blue suit he hadn't worn in weeks. His tie was straight shoes, polished, and every step he took toward the restaurant was deliberate. Gone was Chris the dishwasher. In his place stood the founder, the CEO, and the man who had once poured his heart into every corner of this place. Flanking him were two sharply dressed professionals carrying leather-bound portfolios, internal auditors from corporate summoned quietly over the past few days. It was time to end the performance. Time for the truth to rise to the surface. As the door closed behind them, the clatter of the kitchen fell to a hush. It wasn't just Ryan's appearance, it was the shift in energy that accompanied him. Heads turned, Carol looked up from the prep station. Her knife-freezing mid-chop Emily, mid-order at the POS, stared. Even Jordan peeked around the corner from the dish pit. Derek, standing near the pass with his arms crossed, scowled at the unexpected presence. "Who are you?" he barked, squinting at the man in the suit who had appeared without announcement. Ryan stepped forward calmly, his voice unwavering. "I'm Ryan Mitchell," he said, "founder and majority owner of Willow Creek Bistro." The words struck like thunder. Gasps echoed from the kitchen. Derek blinked, stunned. "What?" he muttered. "That's not no. That's impossible." Ryan didn't give him time to recover. He turned to face the staff, his expression softening. "For the past several weeks, I've been working here undercover," he continued. "Not as a supervisor, not as your boss, as one of you. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I needed to understand why this place, once the pride of our company, had lost its soul." He turned his gaze back to Derek Sharp now. And I did. I saw the fear, the favoritism, the way people were being overworked, underpaid, and disrespected. I watched you humiliate your team in front of customers. I saw you threaten their hours, bury complaints, and use intimidation to silence the very people keeping this restaurant afloat. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Ryan raised a hand to stop him. "No, you don't get to spin this. Not today." He turned to one of the auditors who opened a folder and handed Ryan a stack of documents. "Here," Ryan said, holding them up, invoices. Dozens of them falsified, incomplete, or deliberately mislabeled. Ingredients paid for by Willow Creek that never made it to our shelves. Deliveries routed to another restaurant. Leighton's Bistro, which you conveniently manage on the side. Another stack followed. Employee schedules manipulated. Hours shaved. Payroll adjusted. Complaints filed and ignored. All under your leadership. The color drained from Derek's face. The bravado that had powered his ego for months flickered, replaced by confusion and desperation. "You don't understand," he sputtered. "I had to. Expenses were tight. I kept this place running." But Ryan didn't waver. "No," he said sharply. "You ran this place into the ground while padding your own pockets. You betrayed the values Willow Creek was built on. You didn't just steal money. You stole trust, dignity, and morale." He stepped aside as the auditors began to distribute copies of the documents to key staff members. Carol took one and scanned the numbers. Her eyes widening, Emily flipped through hers with trembling fingers. Jordan didn't say a word, but his face said everything. Validation, relief, and quiet, stunned pride. The room was silent now. Even the kitchen fans seemed to hum more softly. Ryan looked at Derek one last time, As of this moment, you're suspended pending the outcome of a full investigation. Corporate has already been notified. If you choose to stay and cooperate, we'll proceed accordingly. If you choose to walk out, do so, knowing that legal action will follow. Derek looked around the room, seeking support, but found only silence. The same staff he had once ruled with fear now stood tall backs, straight eyes unblinking. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his coat from the hook, and shoved his way out the back door. No one followed. No one stopped him. As the door slammed shut behind Derek, Ryan exhaled. He turned back to his team, his real team, and felt the first flicker of warmth return to the walls of Willow Creek. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," he said, his voice softer now. "But this is the beginning of something better. We're going to rebuild not just the operations, but the culture, the respect, the heart." And for the first time in a long while, the staff didn't just nod. They smiled, because they knew the tide had finally turned. The aftermath of Derek's departure hung in the air like the scent of a storm. Just past, still heavy, but slowly beginning to clear. For a moment after the door slammed shut behind him, no one spoke. The entire kitchen stood frozen in a rare silence, the kind that comes not from fear, but from the slow realization that something has truly changed. Then softly at first, plates resumed. Stacking knives returned to chopping, and the usual kitchen rhythms began again, but with an entirely different energy. Ryan remained in the center of the room, his presence still commanding, but now met with eyes that reflected relief instead of wariness. He turned to the auditors. "Let's begin," he said calmly. The team nodded and began their work. The corporate audit was officially underway. Within hours, the auditors spread across the restaurant like a quiet force of accountability. They examined every drawer in Derek's office, compared vendor receipts to delivery logs, pulled payroll records, and cross-referenced scheduling histories. They interviewed employees one by one, encouraging them to speak freely, now that the threat of retaliation had vanished. Carol shared her underpaid hours. Jordan revealed the shift reductions and verbal intimidation, and Emily provided screenshots of texts where Derek changed schedules without warning. All of it, every story, every receipt, every spreadsheet painted a clear picture. This wasn't carelessness. This was corruption, and it had infected the very structure of the bistro. By the end of the second day, corporate had compiled enough evidence to launch formal legal proceedings. The charges were grave embezzlement, payroll fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and theft of inventory. All of them pointed squarely at Derek Simmons. Ryan was briefed privately by the auditors that same evening. "He's not just looking at being fired." The lead auditor, a calm, focused woman named Marissa, explained. "He's looking at potential jail time." Ryan nodded slowly, not with triumph, but with a sense of solemn justice. This wasn't about revenge. This was about restoring the integrity of a business that had meant everything to him and to the people who had held it together despite the odds. News of the audit and legal action spread through the staff quickly, but instead of panic, it brought a wave of validation. At the evening staff meeting, Ryan stood before them again. This time not as a spy or even just a CEO, but as someone who had earned their trust. "I want you all to hear it from me," he said. "We're pursuing every legal route to make sure Derek is held accountable, not just for stealing, but for the way he treated every one of you. That kind of behavior has no place in this restaurant or in any workplace." He paused, letting the silence settle around his words. "You were right to speak up. You were right to hope for better." The response was more powerful than he anticipated. Carol, the head chef who had spent months bottling her frustration, stepped forward first. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not just believing us, but for standing with us." Jordan, still shy, but standing taller than ever, added, "No one's ever stood up to him like that. I thought we were stuck with him forever." Emily nodded from the corner, arms crossed loosely, but with a rare smile. "You gave us a voice that matters more than you know." The staff didn't erupt into applause or cheers. They didn't need to. The change was visible in their posture, their tone, their eyes. The fear that had once filled the kitchen like smoke had begun to lift. That night, as Ryan walked through the kitchen during cleanup, he could feel the difference. People moved with purpose, not panic. Conversations had returned, real conversations filled with laughter, quiet jokes, and genuine camaraderie. For the first time in a long while, Willow Creek felt alive again, not because of a new menu or a perfect Yelp review, but because the people who made it run had been seen, heard, and defended. Ryan paused near the dish station, his old post, and smiled at Jordan, who was wiping down the counter. "Doing okay?" he asked Jordan. Nodded, smiling. "Yeah." For the first time in a while, it actually feels good to be here. The days that followed Derek's suspension mark the beginning of something Willow Creek hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not the whispered, fleeting kind that staff used to cling to in silence, but the real, steady kind that comes with visible change. Ryan returned to the restaurant every morning, not in disguise, not undercover, but as himself. A leader who had walked the same floor, scrubbed the same dishes, and seen the same frustrations firsthand. He didn't sweep in with grand speeches or corporate buzzwords. Instead, he walked quietly through the kitchen, listened to the staff ask thoughtful questions, and rolled up his sleeves, because if the bistro was to be saved, it wouldn't be through top-down reform. It would be rebuilt from within. The first thing Ryan implemented was a fair scheduling system. No more last-minute shift swaps, no more favoritism or unexplained cuts. Schedules were posted 2 weeks in advance, and every employee was invited to submit availability and preferences. Flexibility was no longer a privilege reserved for Derek's inner circle. It was a standard rooted in trust. Next came the Employee Recognition Program. Every month, one staff member would be spotlighted for their contributions, nominated by their peers, celebrated during a team meal, and given a bonus. "Great food starts with great people," Ryan said at the first announcement, "and it's time we start honoring that he also invested in upgraded kitchen equipment, replacing worn-out knives, broken prep tables, and a dishwasher that had limped along for far too long." These weren't extravagant changes, but to the team they were signals that someone finally cared. Again. For Jordan, the transformation was profound. The nervous teenager who once flinched under Derek's voice was now standing confidently at the grill station, offering plating suggestions and asking questions about new recipes. Ryan watched with quiet pride as Carol began mentoring him, teaching knife techniques, prep efficiency, and even letting him take the lead on a few dinner specials. "He's got real talent," she told Ryan one evening. All he needed was someone to stop shouting and start listening. As for Emily, her charm on the dining floor had blossomed into full-on leadership. She began training new servers, helping rewrite customer flow procedures, and even suggested a new seasonal drink menu, half of which was adopted immediately. "I used to just get through shifts," she admitted to Ryan over a staff lunch. "Now I look forward to them." Customers noticed, almost immediately. The vibe in the restaurant changed, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The once mechanical "Welcome to Willow Creek." Greetings were now delivered with real warmth. Orders came out faster. Dishes were plated with more care, and there was a new energy humming in the dining room. One evening, Ryan sat in the far corner near the window, watching as families laughed, couples toasted, and solo diners leaned back with satisfied smiles. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the newest online reviews. 5 stars, 4 stars. Comments about friendly service, improved food quality, and how the place finally felt right again. After months of slipping rankings and sour feedback, Willow Creek's reputation was turning around and fast. But more important than the reviews were the people, the laughter in the staff locker room, the shared snacks on prep breaks. The way Carol rolled her eyes playfully when Jordan burned toast but didn't raise her voice. The way Emily slipped handwritten notes to customers thanking them for coming back. Ryan had always believed that restaurants were about more than food. They were about connection, and now those connections were being restored. The cracks that had once run deep through the walls of the bistro were being filled not with plaster, but with trust, respect, and something more intangible, pride. By the end of the month, the transformation was undeniable. Willow Creek was no longer surviving. It was thriving. And it wasn't because of some big rebrand or marketing campaign. It was because the people inside had been given the tools and the dignity to care again. Ryan stood behind the bar one evening watching as the dinner crowd filed in and the kitchen kicked into gear. He didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a host again, like the guy who years ago dreamed of opening a place where people could feel at home. And now, thanks to a team that refused to give up, Willow Creek was finally becoming that place once more. As the first signs of spring began to touch the edges of the city, buds blooming on sidewalk trees, sunlight warming the patio stones outside, there was a renewed sense of life inside Willow Creek Bistro. The morning air carried not just the scent of fresh coffee and baked bread, but something deeper possibility. Ryan Mitchell stood near the host stand watching as Jordan prepped the grill with confident ease. Carol scribbled new menu ideas onto a notepad, and Emily helped a new hire navigate the POS system with a patience that would have been unimaginable just a month earlier. These weren't just employees anymore. These were collaborators, partners, and most importantly, people who had helped bring the heart of the bistro back to life. And Ryan, who had once believed his role was to lead from above, now knew that the real work happened when he stood beside them. He didn't retreat to a corporate office or disappear into boardrooms. Instead, he made a commitment to himself and to his team that he would stay connected. Every week, he blocked off time to shadow a different department, an afternoon plating appetizers, a dinner rush on the expo line, a morning coffee shift with the servers. Not as a manager hovering overhead, but as someone willing to listen, learn, and lend a hand. We built this place together, he often reminded them, and we'll grow it together too. His presence wasn't just symbolic, it was healing. It sent a message that hierarchy would never replace humanity. That leadership meant showing up, not showing off. The change in culture was undeniable. Where once silence reigned in the kitchen, now laughter echoed off the tile walls. Team meetings were no longer dreaded. They were collaborative, filled with ideas from all corners of the restaurant. Jordan suggested a rotating young chef's special, giving newer cooks a chance to feature dishes of their own design. Carol began organizing monthly tastings to experiment with seasonal ingredients. Emily introduced a customer feedback wall in the dining room, notes and compliments from guests posted proudly for all to see. Even the newer hires picked up on the vibe. Quickly, respect wasn't earned through fear, but through mutual support. Willow Creek had become a place where people didn't just work. They created, thrived, and belonged. Ryan often found himself staying later than he needed to, not because he was watching over things, but because he didn't want to leave. He'd sit at the bar after hours sipping a mocktail while listening to the soft jazz playing over the speakers, watching the staff linger longer to chat or share leftovers. The kitchen no longer cleared out in silence. Now it stayed alive, even after the last guest left. People cared about the food, about the service, about each other, and slowly the community around them had begun to take notice. Familiar faces returned, drawn by not just the flavors, but the warmth. Guests commented on the atmosphere, the attentiveness, the energy. Willow Creek Bistro had reclaimed its identity, and more than that, it had evolved into something stronger. One evening, as a local food blogger wrapped up an interview with Ryan for a feature on restaurants that rose from the ashes, she asked him a simple question: what changed? Ryan paused before answering. We stopped pretending everything was fine, he said, and we started listening to the people who make this place run, to their ideas, their experiences, and their needs. I stepped out of my office and back into the kitchen, and what I found wasn't broken. It was just waiting to be seen. He gestured toward the dining room, where Carol was laughing with a group of regulars. Emily was guiding a new server with a hand on her shoulder, and Jordan was wiping down the grill with quiet pride. They didn't need a new policy, he said. They needed to be believed in. Willow Creek Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It was a story of redemption, of leadership done right, of a team that chose resilience over resignation. It was a second chance, not just for Ryan, but for everyone who had been part of the journey. And as he looked around that night at the full tables, the happy staff, and the glow that had returned to the space, He realized that the dream he had once feared was lost had only been waiting for him to come home, not as a savior, but as a partner, not to restore the past, but to help build a better future. Together, as a family, if this story moved you or reminded you of how much leadership, empathy, and integrity truly matter, we invite you to stay connected with us here at Deep Inside HQ. Every week we bring you real emotional and powerful stories that go beyond the surface, stories that challenge how we see the workplace and how we see each other. So if you believe in second chances, in standing up for what's right, and in rebuilding what matters most, then hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our growing community. Because sometimes the biggest changes begin with the quietest voices, and here, every voice matters.